quick question. Did you want us to turn off our video during most of the presentation?
Yes. Thanks, Stuart. I think we're ready to get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch of Keeping Groceries Alive, Successful Ownership Transitions for Rural Grocery Stores. My name is Erica Blair. I am a program manager with the Rural Grocery Initiative at Kansas State University. And we are so happy that you're joining us today. We know that creating a business transition plan is crucial for maintaining grocery stores over the long term, especially in rural places. So whether you are joining today as a grocer who is nearing retirement, or you are interested in taking over a grocery store, if you're an economic developer or a county commissioner or a community member who cares about food security, business transition planning is relevant to you. So we will be digging into this topic over the next 8 weeks. And we want to start out, first of all, by acknowledging our incredible team of partners who met over the past few months to create this webinar series. So you'll be hearing more about these organizations later in the presentation. And we also want to thank our sponsor, the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, for making this possible. So we have a lot planned for today. We are kicking off the series with an overview of business transition planning, and we have a great lineup of speakers. We will hear from David Proctor, who's a co-founder of the Rural Grocery Initiative, Jack Harwell, an advisor with the Kansas Center for Business Transition, and Nadine Siegel with K-State Research and Extension. And we are also joined by representatives from Erie Market and Moreland Mercantile, which are 2 grocery stores in rural Kansas. And they will be sharing their own experience with transitioning ownership. So before we begin, I do have a few quick housekeeping items. So the webinar is being recorded, and you can find this recording at ruralgrocery.org, located under the events tab. If you have any technical questions, Our students, Lauren and Jessica, are working behind the scenes and they will be ready to help you out. And finally, we will have time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So if you have questions during the presentation, please ask them in the Q&A box. That just makes it easier for us to keep track of your questions and make sure that we don't miss anything. So you can still use the chat box to share your ideas and comments throughout, but for specific questions to our presenters, please use the Q&A box. So with that, we are ready to get started, and we will begin by laying out the foundation for why grocery stores are so vital in rural communities. And Dr. David Proctor will walk us through that. Dr. Proctor is a co-founder of the Rural Grocery Initiative and a professor of communication studies at Kansas State University. So Dave, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Erica. I am so glad to be part of this webinar series. And it's been great to see folks in the chat indicate where they're coming from. I've seen a lot of our friends across the United States. And I'm hoping that from this webinar series that we will continue to work with a number of you and make additional friends and colleagues as we all work to advance rural grocery operations across the US. In 2007, a newly formed center at Kansas State University called the Center for Engagement and Community Development was tasked with helping communities across the state of Kansas and beyond address significant needs that they faced. And as we sort of explored all of those needs, one of the things that we kept hearing about in rural communities was the importance of the grocery store and the need to address the real significant challenges that those grocery stores faced. And so we started to work on this particular issue. And what we have come up with, and the reason that we are so passionate about working with rural grocery operations, is because we believe that fundamentally they provide they address three big challenges in rural communities. They provide for economic development in rural communities. They are the best source of food access. They're the primary source of nutritious foods. And they are also important community hubs. And so I want to talk just briefly about each of these three areas to sort of lay the groundwork for why we believe it's so important to focus on rural grocery stores across the US. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons that grocery stores are so important to rural communities, and just to give you a sense of this, when we talk about rural communities, we're really talking about pretty small communities. Almost all of our work has been in communities of about 3,000 people or less. And we've worked with towns as small as, we're going to hear from Moreland today. And I know that Moreland, I think has less than 200 people. So we are working in small communities, but these businesses are tremendously important. And one of those reasons is economic development. And so what we have listed out here are some of the bullet points of why we think they are so important. And all of these bullet points are coming from research that has been done either by us or other folks that we know about. And so just to sort of reference these, there's the Department of Agricultural Economics did a study back in 2015 where they looked at all of the rural grocery stores in Kansas. And what they came up with was that these stores provide almost $750,000 a year to the local economy. But not only that, but these grocery stores are resilient businesses. And what they mean by this is that they tend to be in economic downturns. They tend to be businesses that last the longest, that hold their value the most, and but not only that, but these stores are also providing, they are a tremendous source of local jobs. And as you can see in the bullet point there are 17, that on average, they fund 17 local jobs. And this tends to be from a mix of full-time and part-time jobs. But this has been, again, from that study and from agricultural economics, and also a study that we did back in 2008. Additionally, rural grocery stores generate about 1 out of every 5 tax dollars for a local community. So they're helping to pay for schools, parks, lights, infrastructure in the community. The grocery stores are also a barometer for other businesses in town. So as the saying is that as the grocery store goes, so go other businesses in town. So if the local grocery store struggles, if the local grocery store goes out of business, that is significant news for all the other local businesses in rural communities. There's also a thing called an economic multiplier effect. And a study that was just done last year, again, by the K-State's Department of Agricultural Economics, show that, that these businesses, these grocery stores, have what they call a larger economic multiplier than corporate-owned businesses, say, for example, dollar stores. And what they mean by that is that dollars that are spent in the grocery store, dollars that are spent in these locally owned, independently owned businesses tend to circulate in town more. They tend to do more work than these dollars do than stores that are owned by some outside corporate interest. And then finally, there are, in the pandemic especially, but this goes beyond the pandemic, but there are people that are struggling to put food on the table. And so we find that people that receive SNAP benefits, WIC benefits, that they are likely to spend their dollars, as they can in these grocery stores, providing an economic stimulus for the local community. Next slide, please. When most of the work that we have done has been in what we call low resource, low access areas. And it is unfortunate, but nationally, it's estimated that almost 5 million people in the US and in the rural US are living in what sometimes they're called food deserts. But these are places where there are high degrees, high percentages of poverty, and there is lack of access. And when we talk about lack of access in rural areas, we're talking about communities where there's no grocery retail, and they are at least 10 miles from the nearest grocery store. And the reason this is important is if you link this with poverty, the bullet before this, what you find is that you have many people in these rural communities where transportation is a challenge, or you have elderly populations that shouldn't be driving or can't drive anymore. And so access becomes a big deal. Next slide, please. There's been a lot of study that's been done that has identified that healthy food access is best located in small town grocery stores, that the greatest quantity and the best quality locally for food, especially healthy food, comes from grocery stores. And so as you can see again from these bullets, rural areas have been identified as having the highest obesity rates in the nation. That grocery stores, as I just mentioned, they provide more healthy food at lower costs than other options in those towns. And I've listed one, rural convenience stores, but there are also dollar stores, and there are also gas stations. And the grocery store offers more healthy food, again at lower cost than those other options. The third bullet point says that again, in non-metro areas, which they're talking about rural communities here, rural areas, that there is this high incidence of obesity. And then finally, what we have found is that small town grocery stores are often a distribution point for locally sourced foods. For local growers, there are opportunities for them either through a farmer's market that are oftentimes located in grocery store parking lots, or actually inside the store where local growers, locally sourced foods can be provided. Next slide, please. And then the third reason, the final big reason that we think that grocery stores are so important is that they are really anchors of community life. There are lots of grocery stores across the United States that have been in families for generations. So they have become identified with that particular community. These are the grocery stores are, people feel familiar in them. They feel like familiar places where people can come in and have talks, as it says in the next big bullet point. They can have neutral places to talk with one another, small talk. You know, they can talk about, you know, the state of local politics. They can talk about the local sports team. There's no sort of distinction as to sort of, you know, who is more influential or more powerful. I mean, you're all in that store shopping together. And then finally, I just want to say that a lot of times in these grocery stores, they are gathering places. There are lots of these grocery stores that have great cafes in them. They have delis in them. There are oftentimes clubs meet in these. There are oftentimes big tables in the front of the grocery store where anyone can come in, sit down, drink a cup of coffee, have lunch. Sometimes they have little art shows in these grocery stores. There are even libraries in some grocery stores. And so with all of that said, we believe that it's really, we're just really happy that you all are here joining us to talk about preserving grocery stores and how to transition from one business to the next. And so with that, next slide, yes, I'm happy to turn it over to Jack Harwell with the Kansas Center for Business Transition.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So since we're talking about business transition, we thought we might want to start with just a brief overview of what is a business transition plan. So next slide. And the way I look at a business transition plan, it's actually two plans. It's the ultimate business plan for your business. So it's kind of like the end game for your business from your perspective, but it's also should be incorporated into your financial plan. So if you change slides, please. In fact, the personal financial plan of the business owner, the current business owner, needs to be considered in this transition, obviously, because they worked hard throughout their life and building this business, and they want to retain as much value and wealth that they've built. And so the personal financial plan is an important component. And then there's the business plan, and the overlap of those two, the integration of both of those plans is an important aspect of transition planning. Next slide. So I'll just kind of walk through the components of a typical transition plan. The top, of course, you want to talk about who currently owns the plan, and then what does the future ownership look like? You know, is it multiple owners? This also includes what's the legal entity type. Is it a corporation or an LLC? So all the aspects of ownership are addressed in the transition plan. Of course, timing is important. So when is this going to happen? And not only the date of transition, I call it the T date, but also what are some critical dates along the path that need to be considered. And then the next section of the transition plan is the deal structure. Not only a price, but an important part of that is taxes. So most sellers, when they sell their business, are going to have to pay tax on the proceeds of that sale. And the taxes are not easy to calculate. They're very complicated when it comes to a business sale. Some of the components of your business will be taxed probably at capital gains rates, and some of your business value will probably be taxed at an ordinary income level. And it's not something that the average person can kind of anticipate. And so having a tax plan and working with a CPA or other tax specialist to figure out ways to minimize that tax, that's a critical part of the plan. And then, of course, funding, and especially with employee ownership businesses or transitions, funding that business or funding that transition can be a challenge. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to kind of map it out and to execute getting that funding. And then the last section of the transition plan is the preparation plan. And a lot of times people kind of leave this out, and I think it's maybe the most important part of the plan. And that's where you talk about how are you going to build value in your business if you have time. If you've planning far enough ahead and you kind of have an idea of what the price might be and what your taxes might be, if that's not enough to fulfill your needs, say if you're retiring and you want to have enough money set aside to be comfortable in your retirement, you may need to build value in your business before you exit. And so having a specific plan that talks about how you can do that is critical. And you know, there are some definite areas to focus on in building value in your business that, you know, we can talk about at a later date. But just having that plan and executing it will help you reach your goal. And when I talk about structural change, what I'm talking about is the structure of the organization, particularly with transitions to internal owners or employee-owned businesses. The structure of that business will have to change probably. And so what I'm talking about there is the structure of the entity, the management structure, whether you have a board of directors and how that governance works, all that's part of that structural change. And then cultural change, particularly in an employee ownership transition, the culture will need to change, most likely, especially if it's owned by a single person who does a lot of the work in the business, and now you're going to transition it to the employees to own that business. There needs to be a change in the culture to make it work. And then finally, funding, and I mentioned it earlier, but funding is critical. Funding can be challenging, and it usually takes some time to put together the documents and find the right partners to help fund that business. Okay, next slide, please. So why would you want to plan your transition? Well, if you want that business to continue operating after the transition, then you need to plan for that so you can reduce the risk to that business, to your ongoing operation. So without a plan, things can go run amok, and the business might suffer after you've handed it off. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, you can preserve the value or even build the value that you've created. Planning does improve economic outcome for the owner, so the seller of the business can really improve their situation. And then lastly, there's opportunities to defer or reduce your taxes, and sometimes those have to be planned well in advance in order to execute them properly. And so that's another reason why we want you to plan your transition. Next slide. So this is my favorite saying, like death and taxes, you will exit your business. Next slide. So my question is, when you want to do it on your own terms, when you want to have a plan, and yeah, it may not go exactly as planned, but it's more likely to give you what you want if you plan it than if you don't. Okay, so thank you very much. And next, we're going to have Nadine Siegel tell us why it's helpful to engage with communities during a business transition.
All right, thank you. And okay, now I can see the video. Sorry for the pause there. When we think about communities, you know, our definition of a community is that a community is something where everybody has something in common. And so today we have a community of interest here where we have people that are interested in keeping grocery stores alive. So what we'd like to do at this point in time is a real quick poll to see who our audience actually is. So you should be able to go through this, and our question to start out with is, who is the audience today? Are you a grocery store owner, the manager, a community member that's interested in opening a store or taking over an existing store? Are you with economic or community development, a county commissioner, or a concerned community member? So Vote right quick, and then we'll show the results of that poll. And I think we can probably go on ahead and close the poll at this point. And as we look at the results of the poll, we have a few grocery store owners and managers, some community members that are interested. The majority of our folks here today are community or economic development directors, and then concerned community members. And so we can see that there's a lot of different people that are interested in this particular issue. And so if we go on to the next slide, please. So we just would like to think a little bit about why is it important to engage our communities with the transition of the grocery store? Well, we really want to make sure that the community is going to support that store. And so if we go out and engage them, ask them questions as to what they would like to see in the grocery store, we know that it's really going to play a big role in the growth and sustainability of that grocery store. They feel like they have a voice and that we recognize their needs and wants that they would like to see within the grocery store. It's a good way for it to build trust in between you and the residents within the community. If you're a new person coming into town trying to start a business, asking them questions is one of the most important things that you can do to help develop that trust. There's also a real interdependency upon each other within the community. If the grocery store doesn't survive, people are going out of town to buy their groceries, and then they often buy other things. So then the hardware store loses business, the clothing store loses business. And so all these different people really need to be working together. And the overall result is that we really want to improve the quality of life of folks within the community. Now, the two pictures that you have up here, these were ones that were taken in some of our rural communities. The one in the upper right-hand side is from the community of Hoxie. I work with a program called First Impressions where communities do swaps back and forth. The community that did the visit does not have a grocery store in their town. When they went into the grocery store in Hoxie, they were just incredibly impressed. They looked at this and said, wow, this looks like it comes out of a magazine. They were so pleased with what they were seeing, and there was a bit of jealousy there. This was a community of about 1,000 people. Now, in reference to the community that did the visit, they're a bedroom community of a college town, and so people are traveling outside of town for their groceries and other supplies. And so, again, it shows that importance of working together with each other. And in the bottom picture, this is in a small town of Almena, which is about, 430 people or so. The grocery store there provides several needs for the community. They have the groceries, but they also have a small deli in there and serves noontime meals. But the interesting thing about this picture is the sign that's out front. They're willing to work with the other organizations within the community. In this case, I believe it was the rural fire department that was needing to do some fundraising. And so they were having a feed over the noon hour. So the grocery store gladly agrees to support the other, close down their shop over the noon hour or their deli over the noon hour to support the other group. And so we can really see how it is incredibly important to engage our communities when we're thinking about trying to do a transition within the grocery business. And if we will move this over to the next slide, we'll turn it back over to Erica so that she can introduce and share some stories from other businesses across the state.
All right, thank you, Nadine. Yeah, so now we're very excited to feature two grocery transition success stories that took place in rural Kansas. And these communities really thought outside the box to make it happen. And they both demonstrate Nadine's point about the importance of getting the community involved in this process. So we are going to start with Moreland Mercantile. So Moreland is a town located in Northwest Kansas with about 150 residents. And ever since 1915, the town had a grocery store on Main Street, which was Bean's Country Store since 1976. And in 2006, the store owner retired, and being unable to find a buyer, the business closed. So suddenly Moreland was without a grocery store, and residents had to travel a minimum of 25 miles round trip to get groceries. So the Moreland Community Foundation recognized the need to have a grocery store again. And Faye Minium, who was the president of the board at the time, came up with this idea of starting a nonprofit grocery store through the foundation. And she just took this idea and ran with it. There was just one problem though. The building, which had been Bean's Country Store, was now in very rough shape, and it would need some major repairs before being a grocery store again. So in 2007, Faye negotiated a reasonable purchase price and bought the building, and then acquired additional funds for renovation, primarily through a community development block grant. So getting the building back in shape was a huge project. The walls were reinforced, the roof was replaced, they got a new furnace, new bathrooms, new coolers, repaired the floors and the ceiling. And finally, in November of 2013, the store officially opened for business. So this was 7 years after the original store closed. And today, community members can stop into the grocery store, not only to purchase groceries, but also to grab a sandwich or a hot meal, which is prepared daily in the adjoining kitchen. So that's just a very broad overview. And we are joined by representatives today from Moreland Mercantile to tell us a little more. So if you want to turn your videos on, we have some of the foundation board members, Diana Crouch, Alex Leslie, and Donna Leslie, to tell us a little bit more. So I have a few questions of my own, first of all. And for folks in the audience, just hang tight and we can get to your questions closer to the end of the webinar. So my first question for you three, why did you ultimately choose this ownership model?
Who first? The economic viability of renovating and opening a store in a town this size just didn't present itself as a good investment for a private investor. And so as a 501c3, which was eligible to receive the CDBG grants, we went after it with that model. And we're actually not considered a grocery store. We're considered an access to healthy food source because we are in a food desert, as was mentioned earlier. And that enabled us to maintain the 501c3 and as the umbrella for our operation. So that was the main reason we chose that route to open, renovate and open the store.
Yeah, and so we just heard Nadine talking about the importance of engaging with community. So can you also share a little bit about how the community was involved in this project along the way?
Well, we had several meetings. We sent out questionnaires on what the community wanted. We met with, David Proctor did some meetings with us. We were getting ideas. We had locals that were volunteering time and money to help get it up and started.
Demo day was fun.
Yeah.
Yes, and I also remember when you spoke the other week that you said you had volunteers helping to unload trucks when you got your first shipment and stock shelves, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I have one final question before we move on to the next example. The other week you said it took you a little while before you found your niche in the community. So can you talk a little bit about what you did to find your niche to get people into the store?
Well, the picture that you see there is our locally produced items, and it's not just food. There's some ceramics and glassware that local artists have provided on consignment to the store. We really kind of picked up on trying to carry locally produced food, and that was a particularly good move last year with the COVID-19 pandemic because we've been buying locally produced beef. Some of it is Wagyu hybrid, and it's extremely good quality regardless of the situation. But that got people coming in because they couldn't get quality meat at big grocery stores as easily as we did. And then they started seeing all the other Kansas-made products that we carry in our store, like Almena cheese, some locally made honey, locally harvested honey, and things like that. And it just kind of snowballed, and we keep looking for more local products to carry. And that and the fresh deli, where you can get a meat and cheese cut to order. She'll make sandwiches for people anytime from opening to closing every day. The hot lunch Monday through Friday, and sometimes on Saturday, and fried chicken every Wednesday. And so it's it's kind of, we developed a model that served the needs of the community and attracted people that were attracted to the same things that we were promoting. So
we also kind of geared our deli sandwiches to a lot of the local truck drivers that go through town, like farm trucks, grain trucks, hunters, a lot of time here. And the deli counter became so important, in the hot lunches. Now we have long lines right at 12 o'clock to get our hot lunches and sandwiches. So that was a little niche that we kind of discovered early on. The very first thing we had was the deli counter, which was our real asset to bring people from other towns to come and get our deli meat. And again, as Alex said, the shop local things were a big hit. We also, of course, have a coffee table where all the farmers come and meet in the morning and drink coffee. And as they go out the door, they pick up lunches for their families and things like that. We discovered early on that customers really wanted quality in everything. We started out by buying probably generic brands of most everything, but discovered early on that they really wanted the quality meat, the quality cereal, the quality cheese, all of that. We thought because this rural area, there would be a need for the cheaper items, but that didn't pan out for us.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the webinar and sharing all of your insights. It's such an inspiring story. And we will bring you back in just a little bit for some more questions from the audience. But for now, I'd like to present the second example of a grocery store transition, which actually occurred very recently. So now we are heading over to the town of Erie, which is located in southeast Kansas, with a population of just over 1,000 people. And in Erie, David and Charlene Mahurin owned and operated Stubbs Market, which they purchased in 2004. And after a major flood in 2007, the Mahurins rebuilt the store and moved it out of the floodplain. After about 15 years of running the business, the Mahurins were ready to retire, but finding a buyer wasn't easy, especially because the building was so new and would require a large capital investment. So they tried several different avenues to find a buyer, and in fact, at one point tried leasing to G&W Foods, but they just didn't have any luck. So in 2019, they approached the city of Erie, asking if the city would be interested in purchasing the store. So the city considered this idea, and their first step was to hold a town hall and gather community inputs. And a citizen-led committee also formed to study the possibility of starting a co-op. So over several months, the city council and economic developers reviewed the financials, trying to see if a city-owned store could support itself. And ultimately, they came up with a recommendation. So they proposed lowering the purchase price and paying 0.5% of the store's gross sales to the Mahurans over a 10-year period. But before moving forward with this idea, the city needed buy-in from the community. So in June of 2020, the city conducted a survey, which they distributed by mail in utility bills. And the survey showed overwhelming support for the city purchasing the grocery store. So the agreement was finalized in October of 2020. They still had a lot of work to do. So they applied for additional funding from USDA. They had to meet all of the licensing requirements. And of course, they had to find a new store manager. But finally, after months of preparation, the store was ready, and Erie Market officially opened earlier this month on January 2nd, 2021. So we have Cindy Liro on the webinar today, and she is the city clerk of Erie, and she was heavily involved in this ownership transition. So Cindy, if you want to turn your video on, I have a few questions to start us off, and then we'll see if the audience has any questions in just a little bit.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So I was wondering if you could first explain what are some of the advantages of this ownership model, and why did the city of Erie decide to go this route?
One of the main advantages of this model that we thought anyway would be to retain jobs, for one thing. Grocery stores, unless you're a big chain, don't always offer any benefits to their employees. And the people working at the store under city ownership would be able to be considered city employees. Then they would have the benefits of like health insurance. We participate in a state retirement program. And of course you have paid vacation, sick leave, that type of thing. So that would benefit the existing employees. And we had also hoped to work with the school district to hopefully employ some part-time kids from the school too. Another advantage to that would be that we had hoped the city would operate this. We operate our own electric and water utilities. So we're familiar with how utility accounts work. We thought if we ran this like a utility, our main goal as a city is not to actually make a huge profit like most corporations want to. We would actually hope to just fund all the expenses, hopefully have enough set aside to take care of any building issues or anything like that that would come up, but the savings could be passed on to the citizens by, through not having to worry about a huge profit.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about how and why the city engaged with the community along the way?
How and why? I think that the former owners came up with the idea of the possibility of the city buying the store because there is a town not too far from us that the city did purchase their store, and it is operating very well. When they couldn't find a buyer, they did approach the city. But as you pointed out in your bullet points earlier, there was a lot of community involvement up to this point to make sure that the people did want to see this happen. Can you go back to your question? I kind of got lost. I talk a lot about this. I get excited about it sometimes.
Yeah, well, I remember from our call that you not only had the survey and held community meetings, but I think you had talked about the business folks in town sort of sharing some advice as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was nice because we do have some successful business owners that are local here, and they were very interested in it. They came in to several of the meetings and gave ideas on what they thought and they helped with the business plan that I think Dave talked about earlier. Without those people, we would not have known how to move forward. And of course, with your help through the Rural Grocery Initiative, pointed us in directions of where we needed to go to seek help. It's been a lot easier transition doing that rather than starting from scratch. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so my final question is sort of about how you worked with the previous owners to make it a smoother transition.
The previous owners, when their store flooded in 2007, they didn't have to rebuild the store, but they knew how important the store was to Erie, and they built a beautiful store. So they were vested in the community, and they truly wanted to see it succeed. So they have been wonderful as far as giving information. In a small town, the city clerk's kind of the one who has to do the background work on it. It's just because there aren't enough people to do it. And working with them, she has given me all the contacts of all the vendors. It's been great. Also, she was very willing. We were lucky to find a good store manager. We hired her at the end of November, and she was able to work with the previous owners through the whole month of December, just to get a feel of how the store operates when the deliveries came and how the equipment all worked. So she was very, very good at helping with that transition too. She has been available for questions after the city took over. So it's very important to have a good relationship with those people.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Cindy, and thanks for all of your work in this grocery store transition. And we're just really excited to see where this store goes from here. So at this time, we now have some time for questions from the audience. So I think we've already received a few questions, but feel free to continue posting them in the Q&A box. And now I will ask all of today's presenters to turn their videos back on. And my colleague at the Rural Grocery Initiative, Ryle Carver, has been monitoring the Q&A. So I will turn it over to her to facilitate.
Thanks, Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. We've gotten quite a few questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and I just want to encourage you to continue entering your questions there. We will try to get through as many as we can. We've got about 10 minutes to ask some questions. I've also seen that some of the questions that came in, a few of our panelists have already responded to, so take a look there. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I think one question that we received was actually for our stores. We've gotten quite a few questions from the stores or about the stores. So I'm going to ask Moreland Mercantile to talk a little bit. And I think actually this could go to Cindy as well. There's a question about sort of the biggest obstacles in getting community buy-in. So can you talk a little bit about ways that you were able to get more community buy-in in your projects? Maybe we can start with Moreland first.
Well, I think probably the biggest thing was, having a nice facility, which was an improvement from the previous store. The old store had gotten kind of run down before it closed, and people were, kind of getting tired of having to drive 27 miles round trip to Hill City to buy a quart of milk on to have cereal in the morning. And so that kind of got people buying in to want to shop there again. And then we did, pick up quite, our busiest times really were probably between 4:30 and 6 o'clock in the evening when we first opened. People coming home from work outside of town, stopping in and seeing that they had a place to get groceries if they'd forgotten to get something somewhere else. And then once they found out, how nice the store was, they started shopping there more regularly. And so that, I think, helped a lot. We had some community meetings and people expressed, yeah, they did want a grocery store again. And so we knew we had some customers built in, and some were reluctant to shop like any community, for whatever reason they have. But, that worked out for us in the long run. And we started getting more and more people from out of town. Many times I'm in the store and there's somebody I don't recognize, and I start talking to them, and I say, where are you from? Oh, we're from, Missouri or something. They're just out there hunting, and they saw this nice store, and wow, what a great little store you have. And so I think word gets out like that, because I think Graham County literally has thousands of hunters show up over the course of the year for different seasons. And when they hear about the store, I think that kind of, they spread it to other hunters, and I think that helps too. So.
Great, thank you. Erie or Cindy, do you have anything else you want to share? I know that the community survey was a big way that you brought the community in, as well as there was a committee that considered a cooperative at one point. Is there anything else you want to share about the way that the community was involved in this process?
We pretty well you covered most of what took place. And by that time, pretty much the whole community knew what the city's intention was, and that they were wanting to make sure. In fact, on that survey that you guys helped us design, we made sure people were aware of the consequences if this did not support itself, that the utility users here in Erie would be on the line to have an extra fee added on to pay for this purchase. It's not a big fee. We had our Economic Development Committee figure that for us. They were the ones who thought that the store could support itself based on what the prior owners had submitted to us. And I think that was a huge factor. They knew what was at stake, basically. So by having the support from them, everybody pretty well said, yes, we're willing to support it.
Thanks, Cindy. So there's another question that there's sort of a theme in some of the questions coming in about the fact that Moreland Mercantile is a nonprofit, and being a 501c3. Alex, you mentioned that you were not necessarily considered a grocery store, but an access to healthy food source. Could you share, were there any challenges associated with opening the store due to being a nonprofit? And have there been any decisions you have had to make on the types of foods that you're selling because of that?
Yeah, we've had requests to sell tobacco products, and we cannot do that because that's not considered healthy. And so we have some restrictions like that on what we can carry. We went around and around about being able to carry beer for several years. We didn't have any, and we ended up getting beer. And because there are, I guess, in moderation, some health benefits to beer for some people. So we were able to get around that way. As far as, maintaining the 501c3 aspect of it, we did not make a profit at all for the first 6-7 years. It's really only in the last year that we've been able to say we're in the black, and not by huge numbers either. Still not enough to say, yeah, this is a business that somebody would want to buy from us. So we've been kind of a break even situation most of the time. And it's, we have to maintain it as more of a community service, I think, from that angle than a profitable business. And the foundation also has some other projects in the community to promote the community as well. One of which is an incubator kitchen that is attached to the store. So individuals or groups that want to resell prepared food can go in there because it's a state inspected kitchen and prepare items to sell either in the store or like we've had church groups and scout groups come in there and make things that they sell, like beer rocks and things like that. So we keep it open to a lot of possibilities there.
Great. So here's another question for our grocers, and then I see a couple others for a few other presenters that we'll try to get to. Maybe Cindy, you could start with this one. There's a question of what would you do differently if you were to do it over again? Are there lessons learned that you want to share with other communities considering this challenge?
It is a challenge because working for the city, I've learned a whole lot about grocery stores I never ever thought I'd learn, but it's been a very interesting experience. I guess my advice would be, one thing I'm glad we did do was that we spent quite a bit in advertising to try to find the right fit for a manager. That was one of the key things to begin with. If you can get that person, it makes a lot of difference. The person we hired had grown up near here. She left, was in Texas, and was ready to kind of come back around this area again. And her sister actually saw the ad and talked to her about it. So she has a connection with the area. People like that. She's been very well received. I would also suggest that you start early on your licensing, especially during the pandemic. That has been slowed because people are working remotely. You may not always get someone when you call the helpline to try to work through that. And that goes with the vendors also. We had quite a flurry right after opening with a lot of that, but we worked through it. We're actually starting to settle down. We also have a really nice deli with hot lunches. One of our local restaurants ended up closing due to the pandemic here in town that provided hot lunches. So now it's more than ever now, people are looking to find a place for a hot lunch, and that has started to become a very popular item too. So.
And Diana, do you have any, I know it's been a few years, but do you have any insight you want to share based on your experience in Moreland of opening this store? Would you do anything differently, or is there advice that you'd want to share? Oh, you're muted. Let's see if we can get you unmuted here.
Okay. A big turning point for us was being able to get grants. Like we just got new refrigerators and for our for our vegetables and all of that. All of that's kind of grant funded. People want to see us succeed in our community, and that has, I think we kind of started out with older equipment and gradually got new equipment, and I think that was probably the proper steps to take. I would guess maybe ideally if we all started out with new everything, it might have been easier down the road, but this seems to have worked for us. We got some life out of some used equipment, and then that gave us time to settle down and start applying for some grants for newer equipment.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think with that, we've got a few other questions, but we're running short on time. So what we will do is wrap this up for now and try to respond to some of the questions by email within the next week. So, and also post it on our website where the recording will be. So for now, I'm going to ask our presenters to turn their video off and we will just go through a couple other announcements here. So here we go. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the partners that have helped us develop this webinar series. And each of these partners have quite a bit of experience and a variety of experiences that they can be a fantastic resource for you. So first, I'd like to acknowledge Nadine Siegel. She's a Community Vitality Extension Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. You've already heard from her today. But she's based in the northwest part of the state and will be sharing information on how to engage later on in the series during our 4th webinar. Next, I'd like to acknowledge Jack Harwell, an advisor with the Kansas Center for Business Transition and the Kansas Small Business Development Center. He will share his experience again during the upcoming webinars on transition planning and business planning. So thank you, Jack. The Kansas Rural Center is an organization working throughout Kansas to support rural issues. Caitlin Stanley is a new face to the KRC, but is ready to assist rural grocers and communities. Stuart Reed is the Executive Director for the Food Co-op Initiative, an organization based out of Minnesota that works with cooperative grocery stores across the country. Stuart will share his expertise in the cooperative grocery world in a few of the upcoming webinars, including next week's webinar on grocery ownership models. Network Kansas is an entrepreneurial support organization working throughout the state of Kansas. Imogene Harris is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Impact Investing. She will be sharing her expertise during the business planning and funding webinars. Lastly, my name is Rael Carver, and I'm one of the staff members with the Rural Grocery Initiative. We're housed within K-State Research and Extension at Kansas State University. We work with communities across the state and country to support rural grocery stores and rural food access. RGI is leading this webinar series, and we are excited to walk through the next few weeks with you all. Finally, we'd like to thank our sponsor. This webinar series would not be possible without financial support from the Ewing Marianne Kaufman Foundation. All of our upcoming webinars, this was the first of 8 in 8-part series. All of our webinars will be held on Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. Central. We have many great topics coming up. You can see the full schedule on our website at ruralgrocery.org. Next week's webinar will be all about understanding shared ownership models and alternatives for grocery ownership models that can be good fits for rural communities. This webinar will describe the basics of shared ownership models and explore why it's helpful to consider these options during a transition. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next week.